Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. So what have I got for you lovely lot today? Well, we're just back from our watercolour painting retreat in the Austrian Alps and we had a fabulous time. So it inspired me to paint this lovely little Austrian mountain scene with a wooden barn. But just before the tutorial, I've got a very short video vlog of our time in Austria. If you'd like to have a look at that, please do. But if not, you can just skip forward about 5 minutes. So come and join me and we'll paint this step by step together. So we started our Austrian adventure in Vienna sketching the beautiful Schönbrunn Palace Gardens. Now that's what I call a greenhouse, and the inside was even more fabulous with hundreds of species of tropical plants. And then for a tour of the city centre. Here we all are with Andy, our Commander-in-Chief. We had a behind-the-scenes tour of the famous Spanish riding school, as well as a spectacular evening concert at the Palace Orangery. Our next location was the pretty village of Dürnstein, nestled on the banks of the River Danube. Now, the hotel offered a wonderful teaching room with overhead projector, so students could follow along without getting out of their seats. Oh, and we had great fun on the schnapps tasting night. My favourite was the cherry flavour. Then from Dürnstein we took the short boat trip up the river to Krems. Now here is a speeded up clip of our short walk to the town centre. Watch out for the cyclist! So the next day was a real treat as we had a full painting day at the medieval Agstein Castle. With so much to draw and paint, you could really soak up the atmosphere of this stunning location. And the views from up here, simply breathtaking.
I'm trying not to use too many colors.
Some of the locals you really couldn't get a word out of. And of course lunch under the shade of a lovely old oak tree. The next day we visited the most picturesque town you could imagine at Mondsee, right on the edge of the lake. You couldn't have wished for a better spot to paint and draw. Then a short walk into town. Yeah, that guy's wearing a West Ham shirt. And the beautiful Basilica St. Michael's was the location for the filming of the wedding scene from The Sound of Music. Simply stunning. We were inspired so much we had a little sing-song on the coach on the way home.
So the dear, a female dear, lay a drop of golden sun, me and May, I call myself, for a love way to run. So when people will declare, love don't do for her so, she a drink of jam and bread.
Yeah, well, anyway, the next day was a real adventure. We took the Schafbergbahn mountain railway all the way to the top. It was like another world up there with the most spectacular views. mean, that is plein air painting at its best. So our final destination was high up in the mountains in the beautiful resort of Schladming, which is a popular ski resort in the winter. Again, we had the perfect classroom for teaching. And Margot took an extra lesson out on the hotel terrace. The final trip was a walking tour of the magnificent city of Salzburg, painting in the morning and taking in the sights in the afternoon. And David, who had entertained us a couple of evenings with his playing, had his dream come true to play the piano in the square where Mozart was born. So we would like to thank Andy and the team from Harmony Voyages for arranging this amazing trip, but a special thanks must go to all of those lovely people who came to Austria to paint and make friends. It really was a special experience. So when we were on our trip, I loved seeing these old wooden barns that you see everywhere on the mountain slopes. So I did several sketches, some from the coach window, which wasn't easy, but it was this painting from the hotel corridor that really caught my eye. It had this sort of 1950s feel, almost like a jigsaw puzzle or a chocolate box. It was unsigned, so if anyone knows who the artist is, please let me know, because it's this painting that today's tutorial is inspired by. Today's materials: my paper is some Arches cold press finish, 300 pound, 100% cotton, super thick so won't need stretching, but as always any decent watercolour paper will do. My colours today, too many to list, so I'll put them in the captions below. And my brushes, I just have 3 from my range, a 3/4 inch flat, number 12 and number 6 round. And here's the drawing, and the template can be downloaded from my website free of charge, link in the description below. Off we go, and using my flat brush I'm painting all the sky area with clean water, even over the mountains. Then coming in with a nice watery cadmium orange. Now I don't need to talk through every colour I'm using, so I will just list them below. Now all these sky mixes are fairly watery, so all the mixing is done actually on the paper. Now I do get people saying, for example, your cobalt blue is nothing like my cobalt blue, but you have to remember I do pick up sometimes other colours from my palette. It's not always perfectly clean. One of the first things I learned in watercolour painting is value is more important than colour. Just taking a little bit of paint out with a tissue. So I'm letting those sky washes totally dry, then I'm coming in with a watery wash of cobalt blue. And I'm covering all the mountains in a fairly flat wash. So letting that dry again, I want to reflect some of that orange sky colour into the mountains, so a very watery wash and softening the edges with water. Once more letting it dry, and then I'm painting with the brush on its side, just skimming the top of the paper, this dry brush technique to pick up some texture from the paper. And it's great to give that impression of mountains. And I'm softening some of the edges with clean water because I'm always looking for a combination of both hard and soft edges. And if there's something I think looks too obvious, I always like to smudge with my finger. And here, to add a little bit of interest, I'm just dropping in a touch of purple. It'll also help to bring this mountain a little further forward. And I'm trying to get that 50s feel, even with the music. And for this mountain in the distance, just a tiny little bit of detail. And this little mountain here is closer to us still, so I'm just bringing up the value of the cobalt blue. And I'm sure there's a little bit of purple that's got into the mix as well. I'm going to suggest here the start of a tree line, so I've added a little bit of sap green into my cobalt blue. As we know, blue colours always send things into the distance, so this little bit of green in here will just help to bring this forward. And I've left a few gaps. These possibly could turn out to be lakes. And the same colour I'm using here for this tree line. And for a bit of contrast, I've added a little more sap green in here. So now we need to let this totally dry, so it's a perfect time for a short break, and it's got to be a shot of cherry schnapps. Next it's time to paint in the tree, and I'm using my normal mix of cadmium yellow and cobalt blue, and again I'm using the dry brush technique because I want lots of gaps of light coming through, but also using the tip of the brush to paint individual leaves. And while that's still wet, dropping in a much darker blue simply by using more cobalt blue in the mix. And of course I have to include a little bit of splatting for some extra texture. And I've switched here to my number 6 brush just to get a little more detail. Now for all the greens on the meadows, and this is an opportunity for you to really experiment and mix those greens. Now you can see from the state of my palette it's impossible to give you an actual breakdown of each colour, but I'm using yellow ochres, cadmium yellow, some sap green, even a little touch of phthalo green, just to give as much contrast and different greens as possible. Whoa, there's that phthalo green going in there. I've got to be careful I don't overdo it. Surprisingly, it's a very warm day here in the UK today, so I'm having to work really quickly. Those washes are drying at an unbelievable rate. Back with that dark bluey green for this little line of trees. And back with my number 6 brush for these grass ridges and bushes. Now for this little dirt path, and as I was saying earlier, it's drying very quickly today, so I'm pre-wetting and then just dropping in some yellow ochre. So as you can see from the original oil painting, the artist has used lots of different colours in the path and foreground grass. So I'm doing the same, but letting them mix and blend directly on the paper. And I'll list all the colours below as I use them. But you can see from my palette, I'm picking up lots of stray colours as I go. Nothing needs to be perfect. In fact, that's what can make your paintings look more interesting if you, say, pick up a little bit of dark Sardine purple or something like that by mistake. And here I'm lifting out with a damp brush to create a little bit of light. Now for this foreground grass, I'm using all the same green colours as I've used before, and again just letting them all mix on the paper. So it really is an opportunity to experiment and let the paint do its thing for you. I always say it, as few brush strokes as possible, or you'll muddy those colours and lose the freshness of the paint. Now some of these washes are going in while that original wash is damp, so I'm not getting such a wide spread of paint, which is what I want. And continuing on with these meadows in very much the same way, still using my large 12 brush to stop me fiddling. You can see this wash is heavily yellow ochre based, but I'm adding lots of colours into it. Slightly darker values here to help me define the edge of the path. And these dark bushes here will help to create a nice contrast with the side of the barn. And the sharpened wooden end of my brush I used to help to scratch and score in some bush details. Of course you could use a stick for this, but I like to have it on the end of my brush because it's instantly available. All exactly the same process here, just letting the paint do its magic. Remember, don't be afraid of the dark, get some nice deep values in here. A few blobs of clean water here to force a few back runs or cauliflowers. And you know I like a bit of directional splatting, just pull back the bristles of a loaded brush. A few little pebbles and stones here and there always adds a bit of interest. And now for the tree trunk, and I'm using roughly a 50-50 mix of yellow ochre and burnt umber. And then dropping in wet some burnt umber for some shadows. Okay, let's make a start on the barn, and this is a very light watery wash of burnt umber and Payne's Grey. And I'm using it for all the roofs. So here I want to suggest a little bit of reflected light from the sky, so I'm dropping in wet, a touch of cadmium orange. Now for the barn itself, and I'm using a 50-50 mix of yellow ochre and burnt sienna. Now, these Austrian mountain barns, often referred to as Alman in German, are more than just simple farm buildings. They are vital components of the agricultural landscape in the Austrian Alps. Now, these structures, typically found on high elevations, house animals and farmers during the summer grazing season, as well as providing shelter and equipment and fodder.
Don't pretend you know about barns.
And I'm adding in here a touch of burnt umber just to create a little bit of difference. Now I'm using my number 6 brush and some Payne's Grey to start putting in some of those details. Now we're definitely at the ugly stage at the moment where most things don't make sense, but you have to paint through it because it's these details which usually help to make sense of the painting. Now I'm trying not to make these brush strokes look too laboured and painting with a quick confident stroke, leaving plenty of gaps and not being tempted to paint in every roof tile. Next for all these dark shadows, and I'm using a nice strong mix of burnt umber. And this is an old pile of wood and stuff, but I'm just painting it very simply. It's all just suggestive detail. And I'm painting in a much darker value in these upper shadow areas. Now for a bit of drama, I'm just adding some purple into the mix. And here on the sunlight side of the barn, my mixes are very light and watery. And here some very rich consistency Payne's Grey to get some nice dark shadows. And for this open side of the barn, a nice dark mix of burnt umber and Payne's Grey, and again I'm adding in a touch of purple. Just a few shadow details here and there. I am making up a lot of this as I go along. Just getting in a little more colour here with some watery burnt sienna. Okay, now it's time for those lovely old fences, and I'm using the same dark colour mix of burnt umber and Payne's grey and painting it on fairly thickly. And yes, these definitely need your smaller number 6 brush. And I'm using a dark green shadow here to help to locate them onto the ground. Smaller and closer together as we move towards the distance. Now, if you didn't want to put this fence in, I think the painting still works well without it. And I'm putting in a sort of gate type thingy here. But you could paint just a long continuous fence. And it's important you don't make these too neat and straight. It's an old fence that's been up for years, so a little bit of wiggle adds to character. And again, the shadow here is important. So let that totally dry, then I'm using one of my favourite techniques, the slightly damp tissue, just to smudge and soften some of these hard edges. The line between the trees and the meadow there just looks a bit sharp, so smudging will just help to soften the transition. Next, it's mixed media time, and I'm using a Faber-Castell Pestle pencil, and this is a yellowy green colour. And I'm just putting in some details here in the trees. Now, you could use watercolour pencils, but I find they're not quite as opaque as these pastel pencils, which have more of a chalky feel to them, and are perfect for putting light values on top of dark. Of course, you could also use some gouache or acrylic paint. And what I particularly like about them is that you can soften and blend just by smudging with your finger. And next I'm going to be using a creamy colour pastel pencil for a few highlights on the trees and on the fences below. And here I'm back with my brush just to put a few shadows on this fence here with that dark value brown. Oh, and perhaps a touch over here. There we go, all done, and this one in just over 3 hours. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. And as I said earlier in the video, it's your chance to experiment, mix all those colours, get lots of lovely greens, and as I always say, enjoy the experience. And don't forget, if you're interested in any of our holidays, retreats or workshops, details are in the description below. But in the meantime, please don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already, it is free, leave a comment. I do read every single one. I can't always reply to them all. And of course, I look forward to seeing you all again next week for another Watercolour Wednesday. Prost!